there, and welcome to Connect the Dots Learning Center podcast. I'm Stephanie Wagers, your host, and I'm so glad you're here. Whether you're a seasoned therapist, clinic owner, or just starting out, this podcast is your go-to spot for insights, tips, and stories that'll help you connect the dots in your practice. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie Wagers, founder of Connect the Dots Learning Center, where we coach pediatric therapists and clinic owners on how to build stronger, more effective relationships with parents. Today's guest brings a unique perspective because while we spend our time helping providers communicate with parents, Debra Johnson works directly with parents themselves to help them think like a therapist. Debra is an occupational therapist with over 35 years of experience and the founder of Steps for Kids Pediatric Therapy and Steps for Development Education and Consulting. Her specialty? Helping parents reframe challenging behaviors and take a more active, empowered role in their child's care. In this episode, we talk about how parent coaching can improve outcomes, strengthen your clinic culture, and create better long-term results for families and providers alike. Let's dive in. Today, we're talking with Debra Johnson, OT of 35 years and a practice owner. And I'm excited to talk to you because we have a lot of our pathways are the same. And we have a lot of beliefs that I think align. But I kind of want to just go back a little bit and see what inspired you to create your own private practice and then later develop the Steps for Development approach.
Sure. So, I went into private practice primarily driven by personal reasons. I had two more children. It was a second marriage for me, had older kids, and then my husband and I had two more together. And one of those kids just wasn't doing well in public school. School just wasn't a really great option. So we made this decision. We became what we called reluctant homeschoolers. And and the school said when we decided to homeschool him, the school said, "Oh, we think that's a great idea." So, we
go take him out of here.
Yeah. My son is twice exceptional, so
Okay.
So it's just a real conundrum, right? Falling on both ends of the spectrum, and so at any rate, my husband initially did the homeschooling while I was working full time. And that was, that worked okay for about 9 months. And then he said, this isn't working. So I was like, okay, well, I'll quit and do private practice. I'll just do a little bit of OT, just kind of do my own thing, set up a little private practice and see what I can do with it. Well, it ended up becoming a clinic. And then it grew exponentially after the pandemic, like so many, I almost had to shut down during the pandemic. But really since 2022, we have just grown exponentially. It's just been crazy, the growth and the demand for services, not just OT, but across the board for pediatric support. Yeah. And then the Steps for Development approach grew out of the fact that, back then, so I opened my clinic in 2010. Okay. And right around that time, there were just so many parents looking for support for what they were calling their sensory kids, right? And everything was sensory based. And I had already become SIPT certified. And I was trying to address these behaviors from a sensory perspective. But so many of these kids, it just didn't fit. They weren't. Yes, they're sensory kids, right? We're all sensory kids,
right?
But the behaviors were not sensory driven,
right?
And it got so frustrating to have to try to find somebody else to deal with the behavior, right? Like these parents were desperate. They're like, nobody's helping us. The psychiatrist doesn't have an answer. The psychologist doesn't know what to do. We've been going to counseling forever. It's not helping. The kid doesn't talk. It's just one thing after another. And so I don't know. I just started doing sort of OT common sense problem solving. And then I was drawn into teaching continuing education programs. And in 2016, the company I teach for, asked me to teach a course on sensory-based behaviors. And I went,
I know, right? Oh,
but that was the topic. And so I decided to teach this idea that it isn't all sensory, and that we as therapists need to be aware that it isn't all sensory, and we need to know what to do with it when it isn't sensory based.
Mhm.
And I knew what I was doing was working, right? By
Okay.
20.
Can you explain that just a little bit for people that maybe don't understand that when you say it isn't all sensory based?
Oh,
Can you
yeah,
unpack that a little?
sure. Like, so what I always say when a parent says, is this sensory or is this behavior?
Right.
I always say, uh-huh.
Uh-huh.
It's a behavior. And that's the wrong question, right? Because you're making it this like diametrically opposed idea. It's either sensory based or it's a behavior. And it's like, no, everything we do is a behavior. Whatever you're complaining about, whatever you're
Yeah.
frustrated with, it's a behavior.
Right.
What you're really asking is there a sensory basis for that behavior?
Hmm.
And I have just found that when you look at it that way, very often it's not sensory based. Now, yeah, with a lot of the kids that we work with, when they have
Hmm.
dyspraxia, they have a motor based,
Right.
or a sensory based motor problem, we can say, yes, this is sensory based in that perspective. But this idea that everybody is overwhelmed by their sensory environment, I mean, no, yes, there's certain people that are.
Right.
And but even the people who have hypersensitivities or over responsiveness, as Lucy Miller calls it, um, those individuals, they'll still have good days where maybe the noise doesn't bother them, and then
Hmm.
other times where it absolutely does bother them.
Hmm. Hmm.
But it's more related to their level of stress or anxiety about,
Right.
in the context of what's happening.
Right.
So, I don't know. I think that that's something that just really resonates with me, or comes easy for me, in terms of
Hmm.
like, I'm a big picture thinker, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
I like to step back and see the bird's eye view and be like, okay, wait, what is really going on here?
Right.
And um so I started picking apart, in my own practice, I started picking apart, well, is it really sensory or not?
Mhm.
And then I, like I said, I was driven to try to help these parents. And so I started explaining, it really isn't sensory based. It's related more to anxiety, which is exacerbating the sensory responses.
Right.
Um, and so when I had to teach others, and it's like, okay, how am I going to explain this?
Hmm.
That's where this steps for development approach came.
Mm. Okay.
I did a mentorship at the Star Institute, and had the privilege of being there with Dr. Lucy Miller. And she talks a lot about asking questions, and digging in and what's going on here.
Hmm.
And she has a model called "No Longer a Secret,"
I
right?
love, love, love that model. Use it all
I'm
the
going to
time.
tell you, yeah, I was using it. And it was one of the inspirations for my Steps for Development model,
Hmm.
um, because her model, it's a really nice clinical reasoning tool
Hmm.
specifically for sensory based issues.
Right.
And I took the idea, and I added some other components, other things that influenced me, and came up with Steps for Development as a clinical reasoning tool to address behavior,
Hmm.
not just sensory motor challenges.
Can you kind of explain for people that don't know the steps, like how is it different than no longer a secret, or what does it look like?
Yeah, um the process, that this way of thinking, came out of my interest in things like Lucy Miller's model of sensory
Hmm.
processing, Ross Green's collaborative and proactive solutions model.
Hmm.
Love him.
Hmm.
Um, Looking at Mona Delahook and Beyond Behaviors, and the
Hmm.
whole, self-regulation, all the different self-regulation programs. Um, and then a whole lot of work, like just looking at different things like I'm a real big advocate for gifted children and twice exceptional because of my own personal experiences. And so, looking at ways of different people who are saying, don't pathologize this, right? Like, we don't need to make this behavior a pathology. It's just part of who they are, right? And so that really dovetailed into neurodiversity affirming care and concepts of trauma informed care. So I kind of just like pulled from all of this, and I was like, okay, sort of the pieces that made the most sense to me, and I combined it. So the steps for development approach looks first at knowing the child. You have to know the child really well. So I focus, the S is strengths and challenges, and that you need to understand what those are, right? Like, and know them really well. And then the T is for task analysis, right? It's what we do as OT. And so we have this little acronym of ESCAPE, which is what so many of the kids try to do, where we look at all those factors, right? Kind of like in a secret. So we're looking at the different factors that are present in the task. The E is for emotional regulation, right? Emotional reg first. And so we go straight there if they're not even regulated. The P, which I think it's something unique, is when we look at what I call participation needs. So as you're assessing and analyzing what's going on, you're looking at the participation needs as either being, does this child need support for engagement or empowerment? And I see those two things as being, engagement is the attention, the focus, the motivation, the interest, right? Is this kid engaged? Are they there? And then the empowerment piece is the skill set. What do I need to help this child learn? What do they need to develop? Is it motor skills, cognitive skills, coping skills, whatever? And then the second S in STEPS stands for strategies and success, right? Nice. Scaffolding and all those things that we do that actually create the change, right?
Right.
I encourage using Ross Greene's approach, that you focus on one problem at a time, right? And I was taught an amazing technique by a couple of behavior specialists a long time ago. How parents come in with a laundry list of problems
when they throw out the scroll.
It's like I've had people attach like 3 typed pages to our intake.
I know, and some of it is like, that's typical. That's typical. If I could get my own kid to do that.
Yes, that is true. And sometimes there's just a whole lot of repetition on the list, right? Yeah. A lot of, doesn't sit still here, doesn't sit still there, can't sit still here, doesn't pay attention when I do this, doesn't pay attention here. And, and so I learned this wonderful technique of sort of analyzing those lists and being able to do empathic listening when the parent is rattling all those things off, to be able to restate. So what I hear you saying is kind of distilling it and summarizing it for the parent. And then I ask, okay, so tell me what it looks like when they don't listen. Give me 3 examples, right? And then tell me, of those 3 times, which one do you want to work on first?
Oh, I love that.
Because we're going to pick one situation to focus our attention. Because I find, and again, this is Ross Greene's model. He says, you can't fix, never sit still.
No, you can't.
You just can't. And I quote him to parents all the time. You can't fix, never sit still. But you can address, has difficulty staying at the table for dinner.
Right.
And so that becomes the functional challenge that we're going to really address using this steps for development model. And we're going to pick that task apart, right? Look at all the factors influencing it, consider the child's strengths and their challenges, and then decide, what is the issue? Are they not engaged? Are they not empowered? Right. Where do we need to put our energies? And then what strategy is going to work? What I have found is that using this reasoning process really helps to avoid this habit. I don't know if you've ever sat in an IEP meeting where a problem is stated and then everybody at the table starts offering strategies. And
Yeah.
you're literally throwing a bowl of spaghetti on the wall to see what's going to stick. And I sit in those meetings and I'm like, oh, you want to use a therapy ball as a chair. What's the rationale behind that?
Right. Why? Why
What
are you
what
doing that?
what tells you that that's going to work?
Yeah.
And usually the answer from the educators is, well, it worked with Joey. And you're like,
Yeah.
yeah, but this is Billy.
Right. And that's and I'm sure you see this too, Deborah. Like we get parents or especially 2015, 16 when sensory was like really ramping up. But they'd come
Mhm.
in and like I had a parent that said, I only want you to treat my daughter using a therapy ball, or no, you need to use the swing right now. I'm like,
Mhm.
no, it's
Yeah.
executive functioning. I don't. I can
Yeah.
integrate it in
Yeah.
there, but and I love what you're talking about because so much of what we do is task analysis. And when I know
Mhm.
you talk about teaching parents to think like a therapist, when we
Right.
ask the right questions, tell me what it looks like,
Yeah.
then you're feeding that in their brain and then they're starting to kind of like put it out in front of you and go, "Oh,
Mhm.
wow, the environment's really busy when we have dinner and this and that." And then they start to think like we do.
Yeah.
So I love
Exactly.
that method. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And I think at the end of it, when we, when the parents, when it does click, um, they're so excited to come into a session and say, hey, we had another situation where they couldn't transition. And I remember what you did here, or I remember what worked when we tried to leave the park. And so
Right.
even though we were trying to leave a family party, I used the same strategy and it
Mhm.
worked. you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and
I love
and
that
you can
feeling.
just see that light bulb go on.
Mhm.
And I mean, and that's what makes the difference, right? That's what
Mhm.
makes the lasting change, because
Mhm.
eventually they're going to stop seeing me.
Yeah,
And
that's what we
I
want, right? We want them to stop
exactly.
seeing you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you teach your newer practitioners to use this model? Is it something where they need to watch a course on it, or is it a pretty easy, like a secret is,
Yeah.
you could read the chapter and go, "Oh, I got it."
Yeah. So, I have an introduction to the model that we give to all the staff, just a
Mhm.
written PDF that
Mhm.
outlines what it is. And we start at the beginning, where we introduce this idea of strength-based, relationship-based,
Mhm.
family-centered, really focusing on parent education. We introduce that when we're, interviewing to recruit. And because if
Mhm.
you're not like-minded, it isn't going to work.
Mhm.
But then once they start, I share that with them. We do have a problem solving worksheet. I created a
Mhm.
worksheet that I share when I teach the course. I don't need to use the worksheet. And once it clicks, right? Once the
Yeah.
reasoning process clicks for you, and it clicks easier for some than others, but then you don't need to use the worksheet, but the worksheet is there if you want to write things down and kind of organize your thoughts. And then we do modeling. I mean, everybody here, uses the same approach, talks to parents the same way. I really just emphasize that with my staff.
Mhm.
Like,
Mhm.
this is how we talk to the parents,
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, and then we do mentoring whenever necessary, and we pull each other in. So
Mhm.
anytime somebody's having a hard time talking to a parent, or a parent isn't, they think they're not hearing, right? It's
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
maybe one of the speech therapists has said the same thing. They
Right.
might ask me to step in, or one of like maybe my clinical manager to step in and say, hey, can you talk to this parent? They need to hear it a second way.
Let's talk a little bit about how how we as clinics need to embrace parent coaching.
Oh gosh, yeah. Well, again, that was something that came out of the pandemic. Like, I was not aware of any of that until we had to go virtual. And it was
Yeah.
like, okay, how do we do this?
Yeah.
Um, and I did a little continuing ed thing on teletherapy, and included in that course that year
Mhm.
was stuff about parent coaching. And I was like, yes, where has
Yeah.
this been all my career?
And you had been doing it, I'm sure, just like
Oh, I
knowing
think
you and the
so.
way you practice.
I personally was definitely doing coaching, right? I mean, it just
Mhm.
clicked for me when I took that
Right.
workshop. But nobody else in the clinic really was doing it the same way that I was. And we didn't have this like clinic wide philosophy, or what my business mentor says is it's my
Mhm.
reputation, right? It's
Yeah,
what we do.
100%.
It's what we do. And so I did the coaching classes and then had a couple of my therapists do the classes or something similar. And then we got together as a team as we were trying to navigate teletherapy, and together honed our skills on how to do parent coaching. And it was just such a
Mhm.
natural, it was really a natural step for us
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
it took what was already family-centered care and a philosophy of having parents in the room and present. It
Mhm.
elevated it because everybody became comfortable in talking with the parents,
Mhm.
right? It was do that or, not have therapy outcomes, you
Right,
know?
right. Yeah.
So the parent coaching piece and having parents in the room has always been my philosophy.
Me
And
too.
when we interview, we ask therapists, what's your perspective on that?
Mhm.
Are you
Mhm.
comfortable? Because you're right, some therapists don't want the parent in the room.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think they just don't have the skill set for it. It can be
yeah,
developed, but
I,
yeah.
yeah. I think that some therapists, sometimes it's because you're self-conscious of your own
Mhm.
skills,
Mhm.
right? You're concerned that the parent's judging you, or you don't have that skill set. Like you said, when a parent directs you and says, "Oh, you should
Yeah.
put them on the swing now,"
Yeah.
you have to have a skill set of how do I respond to that?
Right, right.
How do I direct that? And that is absolutely a skill that has to be learned.
And I find the other piece that I'm hearing more and more is providers are saying they're dysregulated when the parent is in the room.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
That
I hear
they
that quite a
themselves are.
they're becoming dysregulated. And I think it's this feeling like they got to bounce back and forth. And that's where, the coaching comes in of we'll get the parent on the floor and all of that. But, and if you feel like you're at a circus constantly juggling, then you are dysregulated. But there's
Yes,
another way to
yes.
do it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And again, I would say that dysregulation comes from their own development, right?
Yeah.
And
Right.
their own skills, but also things like my leadership style is Brene Brown, Dare to Lead.
I love her. Yes. Me too. Me too. We
you
are
know,
like sisters in all this.
yeah. And so we get a little touchy feely,
Yeah.
and I'll say to a therapist, it looked like you were starting to feel a little defensive, like, something
Mhm.
happened. And so we have those hard conversations.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important in our profession. Um, I learned that early on as a
Mhm.
very young therapist.
Yeah.
I worked in brain injury rehab, and I had a young
Oh.
man that I was working with, and for some reason he just rubbed me the wrong way. And one of the owners of the clinic was a speech pathologist, and she pulled me in for
Mhm.
some mentorship, and she's like, "What is going on with you and him?" And she did some Brene Brown kind of digging long before Brene Brown was
Yeah.
ever. And I had this insight that this young man reminded me of my ex-husband. And
Oh.
it was really eye-opening
Mhm.
and challenging, right?
Mhm.
To say, oh, and I don't know, I think I was in my early 30s. I was a late starter for OT. And uh but it was hard. And I think those are some of the things. I have a therapist that's neurodiverse and really struggled with authoritarian parents of
Mhm.
children with ADHD.
Mhm.
And, it's because it hit home, right?
Mhm.
It
Mhm.
reminded her of her own parents. And
Mhm.
so we problem solved how she could harness her energy as a neurodiverse therapist to speak for the children and to be a strong advocate. And so she shares within her comfort level just enough so that parents understand where she's coming from.
Mhm.
Um, and I think those things are really important for the connection. And
They are.
if you're gonna do coaching, you have to establish that relationship. You
Yes. They have
cannot.
to trust you. Mhm.
Yes, exactly, exactly. They have
Yeah.
to, and I think that goes back also to a level of trauma-informed care, which
Mhm.
we practice that with the parents. and with each other on our team,
Mhm.
because you have to be honest and transparent and open.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean you have to share all of your dirty secrets, right? Or all the
No.
skeletons in your closet. Um, but you have to be sincere.
Yeah.
And you have to connect. And I think, I don't know, tell me if you agree. I think that to be able to do coaching, you have to have that skill of being able to connect and be vulnerable.
100%. Yes, you have to be able to connect and push your baggage or whatever aside a little bit, ask the right questions to make the person feel like they're being heard.
Absolutely.
Tell me a little bit, what would a session look like for a parent, when you're coaching a parent using your STEPS program? Can you give me kind of an example of that?
I'll skip to like an active kind of a session. We've
Yeah,
already
sure.
done all the groundwork. So, a parent would come in and we'd review what we had talked about before. And maybe there were
Mhm.
some strategies that I had asked, or suggested that they practice. And it's sort of like taking their temperature, right? What are the key concerns? What's come up in the last week or the last month since I saw you? And then we go from there. And I really let them set the pace. They ask the questions and I ask more questions to pull out that information. And then I ask about, well, can you think of solutions? Like what do you think you would do? And then
Mhm.
I might give examples, that I've had some parents who might do it this way. Another parent might choose this approach.
Mhm.
And I might do it this way. Do
Mhm.
any of those ways make sense to you? And then I wait for the parent to give me feedback while they think about those options.
Mhm.
The key in the session is that you're never telling them what to do. But yeah, it's really making sure that you're leading and guiding and
Mhm.
helping them to choose what they think is going to be the right choice for the
Mhm.
moment. And then I
Mhm.
do a lot of reassurance,
Mhm.
of, what, it's perfectly fine. We've just come up with 3 different ideas for how to address this particular behavior or situation, and you've chosen B as your first option. I'm going
Mhm.
to make sure I keep track of A and C for you. You don't have to worry about remembering those. Or you can. I'll give you this.
Mhm.
I took notes. I'll give it to you. When you leave, and try B and give it a good shot. And if it's not working, we've got a couple of other things in our back pocket, and so then we'll try those. And
Mhm.
I walk them through that process. That I call it the scientific method, right?
Mhm.
You analyze, you come up with a hypothesis, you test a solution, and if it didn't work, okay, we learned a lot, and now we're going to go back and test another solution, right? We're going to try
Yeah.
something,
Yeah.
and that it's this rinse and repeat kind of thing.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
so yeah, so it's a lot of guiding and leading, no
Mhm.
directing, really, no directing. Sometimes I guess I would say I get blunt. I say, I'm going to tell you, this is where we're at. Um, I've had to have hard conversations with very
Mhm.
authoritarian parents,
Mhm. Yeah.
and I label it. I say, look, I think you're using a very strong authoritarian approach in your parenting. um, I might ask, is this the way you were raised? Is this,
Mhm.
I mean, and to get an idea of how deep are those beliefs.
Right.
Um, and then I just try to ask those guiding questions. Does it seem to be working with your child?
How has that been received? That's
I
a bold question. I love
It
it.
is. It is.
And yeah, kudos to you.
Yeah. Well, you get to a point when you're working with parents. I'm sure you know, right?
Uh-huh.
Where you're like, okay, this isn't going
You're like,
anywhere.
this ain't working.
It's not. It's not. This isn't, and so I guess maybe I've learned a lot from the social workers that I've worked with, and my own therapists, right? Everybody should have a good therapist.
Yeah.
uh, You know, where they just lay it on the line and they're like, look, this is if you want to continue, this is what needs to happen.
Mhm.
And I have told parents, there are some parents who say, this just doesn't make sense. I can't do this. And I say,
Mhm.
okay, well, I'm not here to tell you that you have to change.
Right.
I think this would work. And if you're willing to try it for a week or two, right, see how it
Mhm.
feels.
Mhm.
Um, but if they say, no, tried it, it's not working, then I typically just say, well, I don't think coaching, at least coaching with me, is not the right thing.
Right.
We say
Yeah.
in business, everybody isn't your customer, right?
No, they're not. And I think recognizing that, and I find being blunt or saying what's really what you feel and true is healing in a way. Like we
Yeah,
get what we
yeah,
tolerate. So if we continually tolerate the parent to be authoritarian or whatever that
right.
behavior is, then they're going to continue to do it. And if we allow it for 8, 10, 12 sessions, and then we come back
Yeah,
and we're like, hey, your authoritarian manner really doesn't work. Well,
yeah,
we just lost all their trust because why didn't we say something in the beginning?
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
agreed, agreed.
yeah.
And and it's not that I think the important piece is that you're always trying to redirect, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
I recently had a parent, a mom. Both parents are authoritarian, but it's very interesting because the dad is really leaning in and digging into the way he was raised,
Mm-hmm.
and mom is having the opposite reaction, sort of like in the back of her head because she was raised that way. She's telling herself she should be strict and
Hmm.
authoritarian, but she's actually very soft and she doesn't want to hurt her child's feelings. And I think
Hmm.
she's having that 180-degree reaction, right, to her own
Hmm.
parenting.
Hmm.
And so she was really caught where she was trying so hard to toe the line and make this kid listen and all this kind of stuff. And I think we probably went through 4 sessions where I was trying to redirect her and guide her. And this actually was not in a parent coaching session.
Hmm.
It was in OT. I was directly treating her child. And
Yeah.
so it's coaching within the session. And finally I said, stop. I said, we've talked about this. And I hear you saying this. And I repeated back what she said.
Hmm.
And then I said, and my answer was that you need to change your response. And if you're not willing to change your response, I can pretty much guarantee you that you will continue to have power struggles with this child.
Hmm.
And then I said, it's your choice.
Yeah.
And she got a little teary eyed. And
Yeah.
I said, I don't mean, I'm not trying to be, forceful or blunt or hurt your feelings. I said, I just want to make sure that we understand each other.
Hmm.
And if you want to use that approach, a different therapist might be a better match for you
Hmm.
because I'm not going to tell you to use that approach, right?
Hmm.
The punishments, the consequences, the yelling, the power struggles, they're not working in my
Right.
opinion.
Right.
So I said, I love working with him. I think he's making progress. I heard you, say that you tried a couple things and it worked. And then I hear you flip back to where you
Yeah.
need to do XYZ. And I was shocked. A week later, she came back and she said, you're right. And I tried a couple things and my husband isn't on board, but by God, I saw it work.
Hmm. Hmm.
It was a couple things about, getting his attention and being empathic with him and, really letting him share his feelings and hold space for his feelings. And she's like, man, it really worked.
We just have to bridge that gap for
Yeah,
parents, just to explain
yeah,
it. And because parents don't have that background knowledge, like, and it feels to them like my child's being rude, being disrespectful. They're not
exactly.
looking at me. How
Exactly.
embarrassing, whatever. But when we
Yeah,
explain it to them, it's just like, oh, it's got to be such a relief. I
yeah,
mean, I know it is. I've
yeah,
seen it happen.
yeah,
So we
yeah,
can't be afraid of kind of leaning into those harder conversations when a parent
yeah,
gets rough and explaining the why behind it because
yeah,
that'll
yeah,
stop the behavior.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I know you got a couple things up your sleeve. You are
Yeah,
starting
well,
an individual parent coaching program, right? And then you
yeah,
just started a podcast, which I listened to two of your
yeah,
episodes. You have 3 now, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about both of those.
Okay, so the individual parent coaching, it's a service that I started. I launched with our clients. They get a reduced rate for parent
Hmm.
coaching. I've actually been doing that with our parents, just certain parents that really want it. I've been doing it with them for like probably about 2 years because we don't have a social worker on staff, and
Yeah.
there was just such a need. And I was doing it for free. And it just can't keep happening for free, right? Like I deserve to
Hmm.
get paid for it.
Hmm.
So right now in the clinic, I actually only have one paying client. Now that it's not free, there's not as many takers. So we'll
I
see.
think how that works.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how it grows. Um, but yeah, and it's an as needed basis. Now the podcast, honestly, so I had this idea last year that I wanted to launch online courses,
Yeah.
and and so as I have gone through this learning curve of, okay, well, what do I do with that? I teach courses and they're hosted by another company on their
Hmm.
website, but how do I do it myself?
Hmm.
Um, and I've got to build an audience. And so
Hmm.
as I'm learning things, I just all of a sudden, it was actually just a few weeks ago, I went, you know what? I am just going to do a podcast. I'm like, I'm just going to do the podcast. I'm just going to do it. Right. And yeah, and I like it. I like doing it. So
And
we'll
where can
see.
people find your podcast? I found you on YouTube. Are you on
Yeah,
Spotify or Apple or?
I'm on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and I think some people have picked it up on other uh, things. I'm not on Pandora yet. Amazon Music. You can find me on Amazon
Okay.
Music.
With the coaching, do you offer it outside of your clinic, like to people out of state? Is it something that you want to work towards?
Yeah, that's what I'm
Okay.
building. That's what I'm
Okay.
building.
So tell me a little bit more about what you're building.
So I have a course that I have outlined.
Hmm.
Um, Really catchy title, Self-Regulation Made Simple.
Like it?
Um, and so I'm hoping in a couple of weeks to have that available for purchase.
Okay.
And then also by the end of August to have a membership, a community membership.
Hmm.
And that's where I would like to offer the coaching, like, to a much wider audience. What I
Hmm.
envision is a closed community where parents, educators, childcare workers, therapy professionals, people can come together. Initially, it's just going to be one hub, and I imagine it'll be more parents and educators and caregivers as opposed to therapy professionals. I don't know.
Hmm.
We'll
Hmm.
see. But eventually, I'd like to have three separate hubs, as they call them, so
Hmm.
that if you're an educator, you can go into the educator childcare professional hub and have conversations that are separate from parents.
Yeah.
And the same then for professionals. But initially, it'll all just be everybody together, and we'll see how that goes. And I'll be loading up content that goes deeper than the
Hmm.
podcast, much
Hmm.
more coaching based, in terms of strategies. And then I want to offer live coaching so that anybody that's a member can jump on live coaching calls that are offered through the week, 2 or 3 times during the week to have some live
Hmm.
calls.
I'm excited to watch you build out this course. And then in the show notes, I'll put where people can find you and your podcast link that you sent me. Thanks for chatting today.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I really enjoyed it. It's great to have a
Yeah,
conversation with somebody that, like you said, we think alike. I think we
we
really,
do.
our
Hmm.
paths definitely are similar in
Yeah.
how we
Yeah.
approach therapy and training staff and the importance of families and parents for sure.
Hmm. It's probably the Brene Brownness in us.
Yeah, there you go.